Hello, everyone. Welcome to Or This. This is my Monday morning quarterbacking of the scriptures and the sermon for the previous Sunday. And this video is from Sunday, July, what was it again? July 16th, right? Yeah, July 16th. The scriptures that are assigned for July 16th were following our semi-continuous scriptures that are coming out of Genesis. We had Genesis 25 verses 19 through 34. We had Psalm 119 verses 105 through 112. We had Romans chapter 8 verses 1 through 11. And we had Matthew chapter 13 verses 1 through 9. And then skipped to verses 18 through 23. So I am continuing my preaching series on the Genesis readings. But in Matthew, we had the parable of the sower, and it talked about the parable, the sower going and throwing seed all over the place, and some of it grew here and some of it grew there. And when it grew, on rocky ground, it didn't last for very long. When it tried to grow in the thistles or thorns, the weeds, basically, it didn't last very long, and when it fell on the path, the birds came and ate it, so it couldn't grow. And when it fell on some of it fell on good soil, and it grew a crop. And then there's the explanation of it, explaining basically how the different kinds of places where the seed falls are different people and different situations in which the good news of God doesn't take root in their lives, in their hearts. And I think we have to be kind of careful about this, about looking at this too carefully and using it for judging people's hearts and what kind of ground everybody's heart is. And instead, I think I kind of see it as a bit of a reflection of what Jesus said to his followers when he sent them out originally, basically saying that this good news, it's even though it's good news, it's not always going to fall upon people who want to hear it. And so don't expect that everybody is automatically just going to be happy to hear your good news and going to welcome it. There are going to be some people who don't want to hear it, or who hear it and for whatever reason don't like it, because it's too different maybe than what they're used to, and it requires too many things to change about the way they view the world and their lives. I feel like this is a little bit of a follow-up to that. It's a parable that kind of says the same thing. It says that there are going to be situations and people who you try to proclaim the good news to, and it's just not going to take root. It's not going to be received. And it's just important, I guess it's just important to be aware of that, so that if you try to share the good news and it's not well received, then you don't bang your head against the wall like something you did wrong or whatever. That there's just going to be some times when some people don't want to hear it. The part that I like to focus on here, and it's the part I used it for the children's message yesterday, was the part about this sower. And in verses 3 through 9, Jesus describes the different places that the sower sowed the seed. And you kind of get the sense, like, if you're going to sow seed, then you're going to, even if you're going to toss, if you have small seeds and you have to toss it, you're going to toss it on the soil that you plan it to grow out of, right? I mean, I don't know too many people who would go, whoo, and not know where it's going to land. If you're going to do that, then you want to be in the middle of the fertile ground so that seed falls on the fertile ground. Good example, if you're going to grow grass seed. If you're going to go grow grass, excuse me, if you're going to grow grass in this particular area of your yard and it's really close to the sidewalk, you're going to make sure to get the grass seed down on the soil, and there's no point in getting it on the sidewalk because it's not going to grow on the sidewalk. It's just going to get wasted. Why would you throw it on the sidewalk? But here, the seed is everywhere. And it's in places, it ends up in places where you try not to avoid throwing your seed there, right? Because you don't want it to go to waste if it's not going to grow there. And this kind of gives us an interesting view of God then, of God as the almost extravagant sower who just, or even a little bit careless, tosses that seed out wherever the wind will take it. But it gives us an image for God and how God gives out God's love. God isn't holding it back and you only using it sparingly, only for those who deserve it. But instead, it is kind of all over the place. God's love is all over the place. It's for anybody who will receive it, whose hearts are good soil that are ready to receive that good news. But it's tossed all about because we don't know who is going to receive it and whose hearts are going to take it lightly for a little bit, but then move on to something else, or who are going to be adamantly like, nope, not, I'm just not going with this. We don't know. I don't even know why Jesus goes into this explanation, other than one of the things that it does is for followers forever after to understand that when there are people who don't receive the good news and who don't want to hear about God's kingdom and God's love, that it's okay, like that's going to happen. Don't expect that everybody's automatically just going to be happy to hear it. But anyway, at the risk of spending too much time talking about the specifics of what it means to be good soil and what it means to be rocky soil and what it means to be the path and all that, I don't think that's the point. We've got to look at the overall picture, and the overall picture is of a God who is just extravagant with God's love and just tosses it out every which way, looking so that love finds the good soil that is going to receive it and produce fruit. And for that matter, I feel as though this extravagant God in the gospel connects a little bit to even our reading from Genesis, because God in Genesis, God chooses this guy Jacob to be the one that carries the promise of becoming a nation of God's people for Abraham. And Jacob isn't, he's not the best example. If you were looking for somebody who is upstanding and respectful and an example of somebody whose life you want to emulate and whose life you want to pattern yours after, he's a conniver. He's a liar, a manipulator, and Jacob does some things in his life that are very questionable as far as appropriate behavior. And yet God chooses Jacob to carry on this promise to Abraham. And it's just kind of a reminder of the complexity of humanity and God relating to the complexity of humanity. Just a reminder that God can cast God's presence, God's will, God's love, God's mission to whomever, God wants. And God can work through whomever God wants. And you don't have to be perfect or always even ethical for God to be at work in a situation or in a person. God is trying to reach humanity with God's love, and God has to use a variety of different means to do that. And some way, somehow, through Jacob's story, Jacob's life, the character of God will come through and will reach somebody. And it certainly, of course, continued that promise that God made. We see that promise continuing to be kept even through Jacob's crazy life. That promise to Abraham remains intact, but also the means in which God holds that promise, working through somebody like Jacob. That holds some hope and promise for somebody somewhere as well. That God can work through us no matter how many bad decisions we've made, or if we would not be considered by others as all that upstanding. But God still loves us, and God can still do some good through our lives. So that's an interesting connection that was made for me as I sat in worship yesterday between these two scriptures, even though they're technically they were not put together on purpose. The Genesis connects to the Genesis readings throughout the summer, and the Matthew is just the continuous story of Matthew's gospel being told throughout this year of Matthew. But I'd be interested to hear some of your thoughts, either on the Matthew or the Genesis, on the sermon, on what I said here, anything. Please share those thoughts in the comments, either on YouTube or on Facebook. And thank you so much for watching. God bless.